In the aftermath of the terror attacks in San Bernardino, it is appropriate on this, the sixth night of Hanukkah, a festival devoted to religious liberty, to review our most basic values as Jews and as Americans. These are serious and difficult times. I'm bound to say something tonight that you will disagree with, but as always, I think I owe you my best judgment. If you disagree, let me know about it, but after Shabbat, not during the sermon. 1, Muslims, to state the obvious. Donald Trump's proposal to deny all Muslims entry into the United States is so obscene and so un-American that it hardly even justifies a response. To respond is to dignify naked demagoguery and fear-mongering. It's noteworthy that practically all of the other Republican candidates for president denounced Trump, forcefully or not. Nonetheless, Donald Trump is now, and has been for months, the frontrunner of the Republican Party. He leads all the national polls. He's not a fringe phenomenon. And therefore, it is proper to call into question the very nature of our society. What does it say about us that such blatant xenophobia captures the imagination of millions? Is this America? Our entire country is a country of immigrants. What defines us is not race, religion, or ethnicity. What makes us Americans is our commitment to the American idea: freedom, tolerance, liberty, equality, democracy, opportunity. These values, as majestic as our highest peaks and as fertile as the most fruitful plains, are the bedrock of the nation, not race, religion, or ethnicity. We cannot give in to fear. When we have succumbed to our baser impulses in this country, we have always lived to regret it. We cannot mistreat the stranger. Who but the Jews know this? They slam the door in our face, the same fear of others, the same callousness. We cannot support public leaders who play on our fears. We Jews need to recognize this need to find scapegoats. We can sense that from a mile away. Now it's focused on Muslims, but it comes from the same place as scapegoating Jews. And if you feel that little twinge in you that this rhetoric stokes, that palpitation deep inside of you that pecks away at you, Muslims are not like us, Muslims are dangerous, their values are incompatible with ours. If some inner voice nags at you, eroding your confidence and whispering to you, well, maybe Donald Trump is onto something, know that this is the voice of your Yetzer, your negative impulse, that is responsible for human intolerance and fear of the other. We are hardwired as human beings to fear the other. It is precisely why the Bible cautions us over and over again not to mistreat the stranger. If that impulse did not already reside in us, there would be no need to insistently remind us that you were once strangers in the land of Egypt. Orators and demagogues know how to stoke these feelings in you. They are masters of generating fear and negativity in you. Resist that feeling. Suppress it. Beat it down. Tie it up. Stomp on it. Isolate it. Immobilize it. It's the worst of you. Our community must be at the forefront of the efforts to reject these smear campaigns against Muslim Americans. It is abhorrent to us. We know what it feels like to be scapegoats. We were once strangers in this land too. 2, Islam. But we must also not succumb to intellectual laziness. There is a security issue, with millions of undocumented refugees and even tourists pouring into the West. It's why extreme rhetoric has resonated. People know that not enough is being done. There is an issue within Islam itself that is festering and unresolved. People know this to be true. It's why extreme rhetoric resonates. It goes without saying that only a tiny percentage of Muslims support or sympathize with ISIS. Muslims are the primary victims of ISIS. But it is also true that most of the terror inflicted on the West since 9/11 is perpetrated by Muslims who adhere to an extreme interpretation of Islam. We cannot ignore or rationalize away this reality. And it is not only ISIS. There is pervasive intolerance, extremism, misogyny, sexism, racism, and anti-Semitism throughout the Muslim world, and it has been this way for decades. Everyone knows this. Many of the conspiracy accusations against the Jews, including that the Jews mastermind 9/11, are most pervasive and most believed in the Muslim world. We need to look the beast straight in the eye and speak the hard truth. There is a murderous, cultish, violent, extreme interpretation of Islam that inspires legions of loyalists to want to kill. It inspires them to view Western-style freedom as deviant and corrupt. It inspires vicious anti-Semitism. This is so transparent that it is hard to understand why it is even debatable. Was there a person in the world, in the entire world, who, upon hearing of events in Paris, didn't immediately assume that the perpetrators were Muslim extremists? We are wrong to suggest that Muslims have no responsibility for their co-religionists. We are all responsible one for the other, and have an especially acute responsibility to speak out against extremism perpetrated in our name, by our own people who claim to speak for us, who claim divine authority to commit the basest, earthiest crimes. Our friends in the Muslim world need to vocally and insistently promote what they consider to be the true values of Islam. And I would also add this. To our Muslim friends, Americans need to see you fighting back in the war of ideas, loudly, clearly, and bravely. You are the vanguard in fostering a deeper understanding of the Islam you represent. You must lead that effort. Otherwise, the extremists in Islam feed right into the narrative of bigots in the West. What they want is a clash of civilizations. Americans need to hear you say that people of different faiths can live together in good faith, and that we all share values common to the Western tradition. Here is an opportunity, a teaching moment to clarify and promote the central humanitarian principles of Islam that you represent. It is not persuasive, for me anyway, to assert that Christians don't have to apologize for every Christian fanatic who shoots up a Planned Parenthood center, or Jews don't have to apologize for every Jewish fundamentalist on the West Bank who commits atrocities. First, we actually do need to take responsibility, in my view. We have done so here repeatedly with respect to fellow Jews. We are responsible for others' actions, at least to the extent of clarifying what are our values. It is imperative to broadcast to the world that extremists do not speak in my name. And second, you yourselves, the moderate, tolerant, peace-loving Muslim Americans, need to lead the effort of countering the impression in the West that Islam means jihad. To pretend that this impression doesn't exist and becomes stronger with every attack is self-defeating and wrong. There's ample reason for this impression. Most of the terror committed on the West comes from radical Islam. It surprised no one when the FBI concluded that the San Bernardino attackers were Muslim radicals. And I would say to our Muslim brothers and sisters, the good people of the world will always support you. But you need to play a leading role. This is simply the nature of the world. Devote yourselves to a reformation of Islam, or the true portrait of Islam as you assert. It should be a central task for your generation, the defeat of this evil ideology. We are allies in this struggle, but we are not Muslims, and we cannot lead the ideological fight. 3, terror. There are many in our camp, in the progressive camp, who seem terrorized by the very word terror. They call it thuggishness, or cultishness, or gun violence, or just plain violence. As I think you know, I would support far-reaching gun legislation. I can point you to articles that I have written and sermons that I have delivered describing the moral outrage of the insane gun laws in this country. I do think there is a connection between the ready availability of firearms and the use of firearms, whether for criminal activity or politically inspired terror. But San Bernardino was not primarily a gun control issue. France has some of the most restrictive gun control laws in the world, and still Paris happened. You know, every day I read at least 10 newspapers before I come to work, or blogs, half from the right and half from the left, because I want to know what everybody's thinking. Even days after San Bernardino, when the evidence clearly pointed to a terrorist attack, progressive outlets were still trying to present the issue as a gun control problem. Perhaps it's what they really believe. Perhaps political leaders fear stoking division and tension. If so, I have sympathy for them. Politics is a business for experienced politicians. It's complicated. Since I am not a politician, since I am more interested in religious, spiritual, and moral truth, I can share with you openly, I'm not running for anything. You've already elected me. I can share with you what I think is the risk of ignoring or denying the reality. If you cannot even name the problem, how can you fight it and eventually defeat it? If San Bernardino was not terrorism, nothing is terrorism. The real threat of terrorism, aside from the obvious peril of people being killed, is the personal and collective impact on our psyches. We become fearful, suspicious, and nervous even going to the airport or a supermarket or a movie, let alone to school or a synagogue, makes us nervous. This deep-seated, often unexpressed yearning for someone to protect us, anyone, a strong man or woman. Suddenly, such values as tolerance, dignity, honesty, integrity, they seem less important to people. Voters look for the ones who they think can effectively lead the fight to defeat the monster, and they tune out all those others who they consider weak or evasive. And then political rhetoric such as "we will prevail because freedom always prevails" appears hollow, empty, and false. It seems more like a prayer than a prescription. This is the deeper risk of calling San Bernardino a gun control issue. People may conclude that you are either insincere or deluded. To paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, a dog still only has 4 legs, even if you call a tail a leg, because calling a tail a leg doesn't make it a leg. We know from history that times such as ours may give rise to political leaders who are dangerously intolerant. If they can make the connection between physical fear and economic fear, they can concoct a potent brew of nationalism and internal division. This is why I fear elements of the right wing, but I also fear elements of the left wing. Take, for example, the Swedish Prime Minister's statement this week that the knifings, shootings, and killings on the streets of Israel are not terrorism. That's not precisely what he said. He said that these attacks don't meet the international definition of terrorism. But we know what he meant. Terror against Israelis, by definition, cannot be terrorism. That is the driving philosophy of the hard left of the Western world. He later corrected himself, but often what you say first is what you mean. And this was a week after his foreign minister helpfully explained that the Paris attacks were linked to Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, something not even ISIS claims. She then complained of what she called extrajudicial executions of terrorists by Israeli security personnel and average citizens who had the audacity to resist being butchered. Hanukkah teaches us that human affairs are complicated and ambiguous. What began as a noble rebellion to protect religious liberty soon denigrated into internal terrorism within the Jewish community. It is the reason that the rabbis were uncomfortable with the purely militaristic message of Hanukkah. Subtly and over time, they shifted the central value of Hanukkah from the military victory to the miracle of the oil. It's not the Maccabees we celebrate as much as God. But the question arose, what is the miracle of the first night of Hanukkah? After all, everyone knows and everyone agrees that there was enough oil for the first night. Why do we recite the blessing of the miracle of oil, Sha'asa Nisim, on the first night? There was no miracle. They found enough oil for one night, and they burned it on the first night. It was natural, not a miracle. Some rabbis respond that the miracle of the first night was not in going outside the laws of nature, oil burning for much longer than it naturally can. Rather, the miracle was taking ordinary material, oil, and dedicating it to extraordinary, miraculous purposes. Freedom. We recite the blessings of the oil on the first night of Hanukkah not because it was miraculous that it burned on that night. There was nothing unusual or unexpected about a day's supply of oil burning for a day. Rather, the miracle was that the ordinary oil was the vehicle for extraordinary human efforts, the rededication to freedom that this little jar of oil inspired. This is our challenge, to take the ordinary and make it extraordinary, to take all of the ambiguities of our human makeup, our complexities, our frailties, our fears and limitations, and to rise above so that we can become who we were meant to be, messengers of freedom, bringing light to those deprived of light. That is the miracle we seek. May the light of freedom, liberty, goodness, respect for human dignity, may this light burn bright for all who dwell on this good earth. In the words of the prophets, do we not all have one Father? Did not one God create us? Why do we profane the covenant of our ancestors by breaking faith with one another? Not by power, nor by might, but by my Spirit, says the eternal God.